Good morning, everyone. Last week we began looking at Exodus chapters 7 to 11, which is the story of the plagues. And I mentioned how these plagues are not just God strong-arming Pharaoh into obedience. They were a spiritual spear thrust into the very heart of Egyptian religious beliefs and their worldview, destroying Ma'at, their idea of the balance in the universe that they believed Pharaoh and their gods maintained. They are God's answer. The plagues are God's answer to Pharaoh's challenge of who is the Lord that I should obey his voice. Now, we're not going to look at each plague in detail. We don't really have time for that. But I want to mention each one and show how each destroyed a part of the Egyptian worldview, crushing their idea that their gods could somehow bring balance to the universe and protect them. And now after this, and throughout the rest of the week, why don't you guys go off and read Exodus chapters 7 through 11 so you get all the details in there too. But here's the big picture view. So in the first plague, God attacks the Nile, which was believed to be the source of life for Egypt. And in this case, it really was, in a sense, the source of life for Egypt. Because without the Nile, Egypt and all the surrounding area would just be barren desert. By God turning the Nile into blood, he attacks three Egyptian gods: Hapi, the god of the Nile; Khnum, the guardian of the Nile; and Osiris, the god of the underworld, whose bloodstream was believed to be the Nile. And so by turning the Nile into blood, something they could not drink, at the command of Moses, God showed that their so-called gods behind the Nile cannot give them life. God can, and he can take it away as well. In the second plague, frogs invade, and the message is fairly similar. The frog was the symbol for the goddesses Hopi and Heket, who were the goddesses of fertility, life, new life. Yet with this attack on their land by frogs, and then the stench of death that the land stank with after all the frogs died, God sends them a message. Your gods can't provide life. Here are the symbols of your gods, and they are the stench of death to you. In plagues 3 and 4, God produces gnats, or a better translation would be biting insects, so maybe mosquitoes, out of the dust. And then he produces flies out of the air. This attacks Geb, the god of the earth, and Shu, the god of the air. He's again sending a message like, I control the elements, not your so-called gods. And also with this plague, God begins to protect the Hebrews from the fallout of these plagues. The insects did not invade Goshen. So imagine the sight. Imagine you lived in a city like Pithon, and your land is covered with flies. But if you walk a few miles north, all of a sudden, once you enter the land of Goshen, it's like you walk through an invisible wall into clean air, out of the swarms of flies. Imagine what you would think if you saw that about your gods and about the Hebrew God. So let's stop with those 4 plagues today. And I want you to think about something. Remember, in these plagues, God is attacking all of the things that the Egyptians depend upon. God takes the things like the good things, like the Nile, frogs, the earth, and air, and he makes them into a terrible judgment on the Egyptians. And by doing so, he shows them how powerless their idols really are. I wonder if God isn't doing something similar today with our culture's idol of technology through the coronavirus. Now, I am not saying that technology is bad, because technology is morally neutral. You can use it for good or for bad. I'm also not saying that this is some kind of plague from God. Now, that is not at all what I'm trying to say, so don't hear that. No one could say something like that. Yet I do know that God always uses these kinds of things, like suffering, to do good things in the lives of his people and for his world. We live in a culture that idolizes technology, that thinks technology can solve all of our problems. Yet when we now have come to a place where we have to use our technology because we're in lockdown, because of quarantine, and technology is really all we have, what do we find? We find it doesn't solve all our problems at all. We find it's not a solution or a replacement for real in-person relationships, personal contact. And we might have felt that way when we could send text messages and go hang out with our friend. So text messages seemed like they would solve all of our problems. But now, when all we have are text messages, emails, Zoom meetings, we realize that they are not as great as we thought they were. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I wouldn't mind if I never had another Zoom meeting my entire life. Like the frogs in the land of the Egyptians, our land stinks with technology because it's all we have right now. And technology is not as great as we thought it was. And when all is said and done, our world is going to be trying to convince us of the lies that they told us before this happened. That technology is great. It's going to solve all our problems. It really will. Just forget about that coronavirus pandemic. It was an aberration. Don't listen to that. Remember that technology is not as great as we think it is. We idolize it, but it's not great. Our idols become the stench of death when they are all we have. Do not depend on it. Value God and the human relationships in your life more than any kind of technology. You guys think about that, and I'll see you tomorrow.